I didn't even set this up. Oh, man. Look at me. All right. Well, welcome to another Dragonlance Saga review episode. It is Lenara's Guildember the 5th. I'm clearly ready for this. My name is Adam, and today I'm going to give you my review of Dragonlance Huma Before the Lands, The Dark Patrol by Richard A Knaak, Charles Martinell, Edward McKeel, William Richardson, Timothy Shiflett, Brian Holt, and of course, that's all Dragonlance Nexus. I would like to take a moment and thank the DL Saga members and invite you to consider becoming a member by visiting the link in the description below. I'm usually a little more put together than this. Sorry, I just got done with a really long member reading. Now, this is my perspective only. So if yours differs or you have different things you love about it that I didn't mention, put them in the live chat if you happen to be joining live. And if you're watching this after the fact, leave a comment below. All right. Now, because this is a short story and sort of an adventurer's supplement, I don't really have like the traditional pre-written review or anything like that. I've pretty much just taken my time reading through this during the week when I got home and going through it at that point, and just sort of, going through the adventure and stuff. I do have to sort of preface this by saying I like the Dragonlance Nexus. I like the individuals on the team. I like what they've been doing for Dragonlance since it was actually still a living thing back in the day with the Dragonlance Nexus website. And I'm not a big fan of D&D 2024 or D&D 5th edition. That being said, this supplement is specifically for Dungeons & Dragons 2024, though it is backwards compatible to 5th edition if you happen to like either of those editions. What I find is really valuable about this is your short story by Richard A. Knaak and the actual historical information about the Age of Dreams. That is where this really shines, in my personal opinion. Though if you do like, and you can play this adventure in any game system you want to use, whether it's basic OD&D or whether it's AD&D first, second, third, or Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, whatever you want to do, or like Pathfinder or, My Dire Lands version of a game system. You can do it in any of them. So it's not like you're locked in to the specific 5th edition or 2024 edition. Also, these images are all from the Dungeon Master's guide, the Dungeon Master's link. What is that called? The DM's Guild. That's what I'm trying to get to. The Dungeon Master's Guild link. So I'm not actually revealing any of the information from the actual book itself other than what has been publicly announced. I just want to put that out there. So let's start. Well, first of all, Nuevo DM. How you doing? Thanks for tuning in. You're reading this right now. Oh, cool. Well, I hope you enjoy it. Marco Rivetti, you had no idea this was coming out. This actually came out in August. So if memory serves here, let me take a quick glance at my notes. August 27th, 2025 is when it was originally uploaded to Dragonlance Nexus or revised, one of those two. So it is available right now from Dragonlance Nexus. If you use the link in the description below, you're going to help out my channel just a little bit. If you go to it by any other link or just on your own, that's okay too. My suggestion is pick it up because I've always said the best Dragonlance source book material came out of 3rd edition through Margaret Weiss Productions / Sovereign Press. That is the best because it is a sort of amalgamation of everything that came before it. What people should know, if they don't already, is that the majority of people that worked on those source books, on those products, were from the Dragonlance Nexus team. And so anything that you're seeing Dragonlance Nexus put out during the 5th edition lifespan, it's that same members from many of those books that were released. And the same members that have been supporting and providing alternate rules and supplementary information since the early days of Dragonlance. So this is as core to the original makers as possible without it actually being from the original creators of Dragonlance. And so you're always going to get that sense of tone and feel of sense of place that you do in Dragonlance, depending on the era, of course, that you're focusing on. In this particular case, is the Age of Dreams, where there's not a lot of supplemental information. There's a handful of short stories written in this era. There's a couple novels written in this era. There's a couple comic books written in this era. But It's not really this total, like, I don't know why I said it like that, source book material. And the closest we got to any sort of Age of Dreams, Age of Might material is the King Priest Trilogy, which is dope AF, and the Time of the Twins source book from 3rd edition D&D, which is also super great. And it covers a little bit of information, but nothing like this does. This is whole and unto itself and has material in it that is germane to Dragonlance lore, of course, but also gives you like supplemental world building information so that you can actually dive in and create your own types of stories in this era, knowing that it is as complete as could possibly be. Okay. Noah, thanks for tuning in. How you doing? You love Mr. Knaak's earlier Huma and Kaz books. This is the second in a planned Histories trilogy of short stories by Richard A. Knaak / adventure supplement information / adventure modules that the Dragonlance Nexus team has put out. So if you liked Kaz, there's an earlier version that I've already reviewed as well of like Kaz's story of going and finding a new island to sort of take his people to. And it is a very good one. And the adventure module is very good in it. I mean, I have it in my review list, so definitely go check it out if you haven't yet, or just go to DM's Guild or DragonlanceNexus.com and find those different source materials because they're all great. And of course, I have some personal hangups, tropes that I believe Richard A. Knaak falls into when he writes. I have to say, even though I always bring that stuff up and people tell me that I'm paying way too much attention to stuff like that or being overly critical, I get it. I can be that. It's kind of the job of someone who reviews to be critical and honest, though. But that being said, I actually really like the author. I think he does a good job. I just think there's a couple tropes that he sort of falls into. In this particular case, there's very similar, but not quite loop that sort of falls into. When I was reading it and it happened, I was like, oh, come on. And then it didn't turn out the way I thought it would. It was like, oh, okay. Then that's all right. One thing that I will say about the Dark Patrol, it connects us with that Rennard, of course, the sort of commander, leader of the Crown Knights. And, I'm going to bring up a little bit of a spoilery information here. You know what? No, I'm not. Because if you haven't read The Legend of Huma by Richard A. Knaak, then this would be a total spoiler if I gave it away. So I won't do that. But I will say that this provides a prelude to the Legend of Huma novel that Richard A. Knaak wrote. So if you ever wanted more of The Legend of Huma, you've got it with this short story. It's not long. It is a very quick short story, and it is a short story. So keep that in mind. It is a prelude. So if you have already read The Legend of Huma, you're going to be getting very little new information, though there is new information in here, which is interesting. I would make the argument after having read it, you didn't need to include Huma at all. He did not add anything particularly interesting to the story. It could have just been Rennard as a preface with his character, and Huma in the short story could easily have been filled in with any other knight, and it wouldn't have changed the story at all. So because of that, I just don't think you needed Huma in it at all. If this was, and Richard A. Knaak did write a Rennard-centric story about like what happened to Rennard after he died, and he became like this ghost revenant thing, and that's a very interesting story as well. So it would have been a nice sort of cap, because he's the pivot point of the Legend of Huma novel, which I found very interesting. So we have a preface with Rennard, afterward of Rennard as story bookends to the Legend of Huma, which of course is about a very pivotal moment in the Third Dragon War, with Huma Dragonbane and Gwyneth the Silver Dragon. So Heart is the dragon's name. So you really didn't need Huma in it at all, but it's nice to see him again. So you can't really complain having another Huma story. The biggest issue with writing about Huma in this time frame now is that we know Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman are releasing their War Wizard story and Young Huma Adventure with Magius trilogy starting, I think, next year. And so what we have are stories of alternate versions of the same character, which are going to just confuse audiences who may want to learn more about Huma and then read Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman's work and be completely confused because it's wholly disparate than this version that Richard A Knaak has already founded about Huma and Magius and the Third Dragon War. It's going to be completely different. And so you have two completely different characters with the exact same names in the exact same campaign setting, a novel setting, as it were. And it's unnecessary. I just really wish Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman would have paid attention to what exists about the character already, rather than scrapping it all and doing their own thing, because it doesn't do the fan base any justice. It doesn't do the other authors that have written the characters any justice. And it's actually really rude because they had already defined it. And one thing about Dragonlance that has always been a sort of rough roadmap, and the artists certainly paid attention to this, was whoever did it first, everyone else that followed referenced that as the version. So if there was ever a painting of Tika Majir, for example, whoever painted her first, they would refer to that as what Tika Majir looked like. And the authors, just by basic respect, should do the same thing. If they're going to write about a character, look to the people who did it. When Richard A Knaak was writing about Huma Dragonbane and did his story, he was looking back on the poem that Michael Williams originally wrote and the tales and source information that were released in the DL series of adventure novels and the Chronicles, the Dragonlance Chronicles. So there's always the sort of a background of information that you pull on and move forward. Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman decided not to do that and completely changed everything. So because of their actions, this could suffer. This short story could suffer for it because they're going to be like, this isn't canon, I shouldn't read it, and blah. Look, here's the reality. There are alternate histories and alternate versions of stories in Dragonlance since it began. It's always been an issue. So don't let someone else's interpretation of a character change whether or not, or be a deciding factor on whether you enjoy a short story or a novel by a different author. All that is to say, I think you should read this. This is, if you bought this only for the short story, I think it's worth the money, and it's a fun short story, and it gives you some pretty interesting information. There are some problems that I will bring up. EM, thanks for tuning in. Good to see you. Marco, you're not the biggest fan of Knaak's version, but in retrospect, you prefer that it would have been what was shown about the Third Dragon War than the latest version by Weis and Hickman. Mark, thanks for tuning in. You wish we had a full-length Fieldthas backstory. Oh, that would be interesting too. All right, so all of that being said, how can I explain this story without spoiling anything? So basically, there's some trouble happening, and in the sort of, how do I explain this? Not in the front of the war front, but in villages surrounding the sort of Solamnic region and Ergoth region during the Third Dragon War. And so Rennard has to take a troop of knights to go investigate what's going on. The big secret, which I'm not going to spoil, but I'm going to infer, is that it's known and it's intentionally leading people to a specific place for a specific reason. There's a black dragon in this that breathes fire. That's a problem I have. I get good dragons can breathe both fire and their special breath weapon, but other dragons, chromatic dragons have always just had the one type. So black dragons should be breathing acid, not fire. That's a problem I have. Also, there's a character that is... Where is the character's name? Davrin. Sir Davrin. It's presented as Sir Davrin for the whole story until the final third of the short story. And then in multiple places, it's actually Darvin. Darven rather than Davren. It's a small thing, but it's a short story, so it should have been noticed, and they should have corrected it. But again, it's a small thing. It's not going to break you of the story. You just think that that would have been noted. So make the note. It's easily updated because it's a PDF, so that's what I would suggest anyway. Either Davrin or Darvin, I don't care which it is, just make it consistent, and everything will be great. I would fix the dragon's breath weapon to acid, because it doesn't make sense that a black dragon would be breathing fire. If you do really want it to be fire, you could have it be a charred red dragon, though I don't know how it'd be charred, or maybe it's covered in mud. The scene was all rainy and sort of stormy, so maybe that could, it had hues of red underneath its muddy or battle-worn visage, however you want to phrase it. But it's an issue. It's an easy one to correct. Don't know why it wasn't paid attention to, but it's one of those things that pulls you out when you're like, especially because you're buying this because it's a supplement too. So you're going to enjoy the short story, but you're also going to be paying attention to the D&D aspects of it. And when you add the two together, one should follow the other, like logically. If it's a short story in a D&D supplement for D&D, the game, it should follow the conventions of the game. Anyway, not a big thing again, but just something I noticed. I did like a little twist that it added near the end of it. And there's this little moment in the middle when they get to this village, and there's this statement. Oh, I'm not sure I want to say it because it's a nice little moment. There's a statement that's made by one of the characters, and you're like, whoa, wait, what? And you instantly think that this is a completely different setup than it actually is. And of course, if you know Rennard from The Legend of Huma, you kind of already have your hairs on end, like, okay, where is this going? What is going on? But it is really nice to sort of see a location that is important to specific characters, to see, get this nice little twist on two main characters of the bad guys' side that I did not know, that I didn't pick up in Legend of Huma, which is why I think it's a big spin in this version of the short story, because it connects two big bad guys in a really important way, which also adds context on why people are super pissed when something happens in Legend of Huma that, is contextualized in this story. That I just thought was, oh, well, they're on the same bad side, and so of course they're going to be upset. But now it actually adds a different depth to it. I know this is vague and doesn't make sense. Buy the supplement, read the short story. It'll make perfect sense. Okay. So that being said, the story itself was very tight, very well contained, and the adventure that they, Dragonlance Nexus, put together based on this short story, which is very similar to when the Kaz adventure supplement was released, and the short story / adventure connections, but major differences, were released prior to this. It does make it very interesting because, one, and this is something that Dragonlance has done from the beginning. A lot of people complained about, having modules set after novels, that it would just be redundant and you would already know what to do because you read the novel. Well, that's not true, because the adventure modules actually changed content that was actually in the novels changed content that was in the modules so as not to be spoilers for the actual modules. And the modules have alternate versions of outcomes so that it's a completely, isolated experience that is different from the novels themselves. So you can play through the modules, read the novels, and find two very different stories. I mean, not very different, but slightly different stories with different events, different NPCs, different outcomes, and still feel wholly satisfied by each. That's what Dragonlance Nexus does with this module and the preceding Kaz module based on the short stories that both supplements contain. Which, I sort of was a little bit critical in my original note about when I reviewed the Kaz one, The Lost Colony, but I'm really actually appreciating in this one, because you don't just want to play through a short story. You want your characters to be invested, to have meaning, to have, you're supposed to be the hero. You're not supposed to be following a hero around. And so I really appreciate that they took that cue that had been a historical Dragonlance trope from the very beginning and played it through with this. Now, the real strength of this, short story and background information. The maps in this supplement are gold. This is the first map of the Age of Dreams of Solamnia that is great that you're ever going to see. Like the other one was, I think, after Istar was already raised. That's after the Age of Knights, in the Age of Might. So this is before that. So this is when Aragoth Empire is still a big main presence. Solamnia is a big main presence. And those are the two main empires that are germane to the story. Istar is sort of fledgling and coming, but it's not the big empire that happens because that happens as a result of the Third Dragon War. And just as a quick synopsis there, it was actually the Wizards of High Sorcery that were governing Istar at the time. The Third Dragon War pulled them away to deal with the Third Dragon War, and Istar felt isolated and alone and in danger. So the priests sort of came up to the defense of the citizens of Istar, the city-state of Istar, and that's where the king priest came from and why Istar became a religious center and not a magical center. If the wizards would have stayed, because they already had a Tower of High Sorcery there, then it wouldn't have been a king priest. It probably would have been a mage lord, or it just would have been its own. Maybe it would never would have been an empire in the first place. Like, who knows? Alternate histories there. But I just found it interesting that if you understand the history of what's happening behind the scenes of the Third Dragon War, why these different empires exist, and why this one event affected so many other things, you start to realize of the import of these events. And so all that is to say that this does a really good job of providing context in a time that we've never really had a lot of context in. So great thing is the maps. The maps are really beautiful, and they do a great job of placing the era. There's some like pseudo 3D maps. I've never really been a fan of those when it comes to D&D. I know there's a big audience for it, so that's awesome. But for me, I really like just the straight top-down stuff. The sort of half dimensionality of some of these that are sort of like Diablo or something like that. It's weird to move your figurines around that sort of a map. So I don't know. For me, it doesn't really work that well. And there are a few of them, but for the big landmass regions, they're just beautiful. Okay. They have a full history of the Third Dragon War. And when I say a full history, I mean very akin to the timeline of Krynn from the Dragonlance campaign setting 3rd edition version of a full history. So they referenced short stories, they referenced the comics, and they referenced the general novels and history that have been presented thus far, like in Legend of Huma, for example, in order to sort of contextualize this entire timeline of, I think it starts around like 76, like 1076, all the way down to the end of the Third Dragon War. So you get a really nice, healthy span of time during this Third Dragon War of what is happening and where, and what stories, where they fit in. They don't all relate to each other. And it seems like they might have tried to create the through line or something, like this is why we got in the trajectory of the Dragon War. But in my interpretation of reading it, it's really just explaining how different stories fit in to the era of the Third Dragon War, rather than this led to that, led to this type history. You know what I mean? In either case, it was researched wonderfully, it was presented wonderfully, and I really enjoyed revisiting some of the comics that I've done live readings for on this channel, and short stories that I've read, and the novels, sort of a summation of all of that together to contextualize the era that this entire supplement is set in. But that's not all. It also adds full sort of geographic understanding, sort of governments and religions and wizards and like world setting, so that, and it provides you adventure hooks and story ideas, so that it not only fully contextualizes this Age of Dreams, this era of the Age of Dreams, but it also provides you world information and adventure story ideas, so that any DM can drop their characters right in the middle of this era and just run wild. And again, I know this is built for 2024 D&D. You don't need to play that. You can do this in AD&D if you want, because the information isn't game system specific, it's setting specific. So have fun with it. Do it in whatever game system you love, but this valuable information is still going to be something you're going to want to buy in order to play it. I will say that if you do end up buying this supplement, if you haven't already, you should probably get Tasselhoff's Pouches of Everything Revised, because that adds D&D 2024/5e mechanic context for Dragonlance. Infinitely better. Infinitely better. You can't even really compare them to the Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen supplement / adventure that came out for 5th edition. So if you ever want to play 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons with Dragonlance campaign setting, go to the Tasselhoff Pouches of Everything Revised that Dragonlance Nexus put out, because it's totally worth it. It's worth the money, and it's a great supplement. Again, everything Dragonlance Nexus puts out is just gold. All right, that being said, so the context of the geography and the organizations and everything, the setting of the Age of Dreams is awesome. They have plug-and-play stat blocks for the Dreadwolf, Dread Zombies, Hittite Spy, Knight of the Rose, and War Priest, which fit perfectly into D&D 2024 rule set. And just for those monsters alone, because they're so different than everything else that D&D 2024 has been releasing or 5th edition has released, and it's, to my knowledge, never been statted out before. I mean, we've had Solemnity Knights and stuff, but like the Dreadwolf and Dread Zombie and Hittite Spy, stuff like that is wholly new. And it's very, very cool to see it in this edition. If it is an older edition, someone please let me know, because I am ignorant to that. Okay, so we've got the full maps of the Age of Dreams of Solemnity, which is great. The full history of the Third Dragon War, which is great. A sort of, time span thing. We've got the stat blocks of monsters and foes and friends, NPCs, which is great. You got the adventure hooks and ideas, which is awesome. You got the Dark Patrol by Richard A Knaak, which again is a great story with a nice little twist in it that adds wonderful context. That I would still recommend you read Legend of Huma first, and then read this short story and the other short story he wrote about Rennard being like a revenant or whatever, because it was great. Read those after reading Legend of Huma. And if you want to throw in Kaz the Minotaur and all the other Kaz spin-off novels and short stories and stuff, that too. All of this to say is, because I'm critical of something, it means that I like that thing and I care about it. And so I like this author. I care that he's still writing for Dragonlance. I think it's awesome. And, just because my opinion can be a little nitpicky does not mean I don't enjoy it. And I want to make sure everyone understands that, because I do think you should be enjoying it too. This is peak Dragonlance. And in a time when we don't get a lot of peak Dragonlance anymore, if at all. I mean, regardless of how you felt about the Destinies trilogy, we've been starving for Dragonlance content for a long time. Even after Shadow of the Dragon Queen was released, we were still starving for Dragonlance content, because that wasn't really Dragonlance feeling content. And so that's the void that the Dragonlance Nexus and Richard A Knaak are filling right now. And if you're not aware of it, if you haven't been involved in it, in like buying the supplements and stuff because you just aren't a gamer, for example, do yourself a favor, man. Like, this is, even if it's basically like buying Leaves from the Inn of the Last Home. Yeah, you're going to get some game-specific information included in some cases, but mostly it's just background information on a setting that we all desperately love. So why would you not want to support people who are actively creating content like that? That's what I think. You may differ. Let me know in the comments below. I welcome all of your feedback, even if it's dissenting. Let me know what you think of this Huma Before the Lance, the Dark Patrol game supplement / short story / adventure module. The module itself is different. It takes characters from 1st level to 4th level in the Age of Dreams during the very beginnings of the Third Dragon War. So if you want to start this as a sort of jumping off point to a full-blown Third Dragon War epic campaign, it's here, baby. All you gotta do is roll up characters and dive right in. It's totally worth your time. I recommend it. All right. So if you're a fan of Richard A Knaak, buy this supplement. If you love Dragonlance, buy the supplement. If you like the Age of Dreams and the Age of Nights, Age of Might, as it were. You should definitely pick up this supplement. If you just like to read about Dragonlance as a setting, as sort of novel backstory, definitely get this supplement. And if you like the nice crunch of D&D 2024 storytelling, or you just want to use it in a different edition, buy this supplement. All right. Any little nitpicks I have aside are not enough to deter anyone on picking this up, because I think it is a valuable addition to your library. All right. That is it for my review of Dragonlance Huma, Before the Lance, The Dark Patrol by Richard A Knaak, Charles Martinell, Edward McKeel, William Richardson, Timothy Shiflett, Brian Holt, Dragonlance Nexus. Would you play a game set in the Age of Dreams? Do you think the different versions of Huma will confuse readers? And finally, what do you think of the final Histories game supplement? What do you think the final Histories game supplement will be about that the Dragonlance Nexus is releasing? Feel free to email me at info@dealsaga.com or leave a comment below. I'd like to take a moment and remind you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, ring the bell to get notified about upcoming videos, and click the like button. This all goes to help other Dragonlance fans learn about this channel and its content. Also, check out DragonlanceNexus.com and Dragonlance Nexus YouTube channel. The link is also in the description. This channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of the Dragonlance Saga, and I thank you very much for joining in that celebration. Thank you for watching. This has been Adam with Dragonlance Saga, and until next time, Slanjuvar.